Well, we've gotten started with some good history. History is, names and dates and events, but it's stories. It's people, it's the things that happen that make the big stuff happen. And Jerry Summers, I'll just have to tell you, I don't know if I've told you this, Jerry. When I met Jerry, I was kind of intimidated. I was a fairly new election administrator here in Rhea County. He was on the election commission in Hamilton County. He's a lawyer, I'm not. There had been an incident in Rhea County that I was involved in. He asked me about that, and I told him, okay, oh shoot, I'm in trouble. We survived that, and I want to say it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jerry Summers, an attorney who has practiced in this courtroom when it was a courtroom, a historian in his own right, law, Hamilton County particularly, but interesting stuff about the people who make up Southeast Tennessee, and in this case, the Scopes trial. So Jerry, thanks for being here, and take it away.
Thank you for having me. First of all, I'd like to make certain you understand I was not part of the regional participation of the French team in 1925. Also, I'll be very honest with you. I do not know what the facts or the description of the Scopes trial. Every time I got a fact and I corroborated with someone else, then I thought, well, that's what's real. But then someone else contradicts it. So you're on your own, you're subjective. Of course, the history speaks for itself. Whether it's true history, whether it's facts, I don't know. You know, Tom Davis is not that, and I admit to it, I will, Mr. Spencer. I saw a YouTube article on interview with the Scopes trial in Fairfield. Tom Davis didn't do me a favor by, I'm kind of like a sign painter being put in between two artists that's supposed to paint a picture of the president. Because what you got, I don't know what Mr. Spencer said, but what he likes him to say, I'm going to read a cattail and say, and by the way, someone said, well, why are you dressed up in a suit? Are you trying to impersonate those tractor-trailer lawyers and like they do? I said, no. Their suit's a lot more expensive than mine. But basically, what can I say of interest that hopefully will attract your attention? I've tried, I've lost, and I won a few cases in this courtroom over the year. And I didn't get it even then. Because, Chattanooga lawyers, there's always a little bit of difference between Chattanooga lawyers and folks in Rhea County. And it was kind of, you come up and I was like a young lawyer, I would up and arguing how wonderful I was for me to be in this historical courtroom with the ghost of, Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, and George, and they never went against me. But they look at me like, is he kind of crazy? Because that's what be pointed out. Not everybody in Rhea County liked the place to have the eternal pile of monkeys in it. And I finally figured it out. But I said something on an interview the other day that was wrong about taking Dayton 100 years to Rhea County to progress, to get past the reputation of the Scopes trial. That's not true. There's a lot of development. You may get more, you won't, kind of like a few people in Chattanooga, but you're coming up the highway, and of course, it didn't take 100 years for Dayton to get where it is now. But part of development, the latest thing, I believe, is 1,500 new employees of the Phoenix Tire Company. Dayton is on the move, and I'm honored to be here, and thank you very much. Now, I get this handout here, and I said there were probably 30 people, so I egotistical about 40. But if this is what I want to talk about, I'll just pass that around if anybody wants one. We have one back.
I need one.
What that is, it's a handout and it's sources that hopefully, if you take basically Tom's College is going forever, and take Ed Larsen's book, World Europe's Prize, which is way above my head, but as far as reputations and authors, I've tried to put together sentences in common and punctuation. About all that the Scopes trial is probably a million words have been written about the Scopes trial, and my granddad used to say, that's been written in choke goat. So that's many words that's taking place. Some are books, some are master's theses, some are. But what you have here, if you want to learn more about it, and these are cheap, most of them are free, some of them have been mentioned in the handouts, but basically just a couple master's theses in regard that give you a lot of information about. Going through each one of these four that are moved. The first one, Warren Allen, is a master's thesis, the background of the Scopes trial. That's fantastic. Of course, Ed Larsen's book. This book here, if you can find one, you might have to pay something for it. Center of the Storm is the autobiography of Thomas Scopes. He basically says it didn't really happen that way, the way it's been projected. There's a lot of things. In fact, he says, in 1967, when he wrote his book, he said, I don't know if I really taught students at Ray Central about evolution. If they say I did, well, I admit it, but basically what it was, there was some creative lawyering in order to get this case in Boston that there was violations of the Butler Act that was passed by the Tennessee legislature. Now, this case here today, all around the country, the controversy was raging, the battle between science and religion. Several states were adopted. Now, this is just like what we got today pictured on Fox News and CNN in regard to questions of transgenders, sex athletes, abortion, inflation, immigration. That's a big issue you can hear about every night. You switch your channel. But back in the era, the big issue was what Spencer's talked about, Nicholas Spencer talked about. The big issue was this conflict between religion and science. And that was before, and if you'll know about it, it was this case that took place, came to little Dayton, Tennessee. At the time, Dayton was in a depressed environmental situation. And the architect of all this is George Rappaport. I hope I was step on Ed Larsen's toes. I just want to give you a little bit exactly how he got here. He got here because a farmer named John Butler passed the Butler Act. He filed it in January. It was passed, signed by Governor Austin Peay. And Tennessee had enacted the first statute, as was said by Tom, a very innocuous system misdemeanor. It didn't even have any jail time, but it was really designed for the purpose of this trial was to bring Dayton out of the economic doldrums. George Accolade, an engineer who very related from Dayton, I understand, I may be wrong about half what I say, but you discover it out. But I'm telling you the subjective. George Rappaport was here because I think understand one period is that he was going to dispose of the equipment of the coal company that had gone bad. And he saw what happened is when the legislature had passed the Butler Act, that the ACLU, now, every night we know what the ACLU is, and every major case. The ACLU was formed in 1920 And they were looking for a big case. He got one here in Dayton, Tennessee, but the reason the case is here is because Dayton had enacted the first act. Now, that's part of my theory. But anyway, the purpose of the trial, Dayton had population had dropped from 1,900 to 1,500 people. And of those 1,500 people, I believe if you talk to them, the scope that were alive, those 1,500 people could probably tell you 3,000 or 5,000 different stories about what the real situation was in the Scopes trial. But to give you another indication of how Dayton was not doing very well, the 1910 census had over 15,000 citizens in Rhea County. That would have to be called a boomer. Well, by 1920, it dropped to less than 14,000 into a downward spiral. And of course, that would have to be the bus area. So this is what George Rappelay, when he saw, when the ACLU saw the Butler bill had been passed, they put an ad in the Centennial paper looking for somebody to be the guinea pig in regard to test the constitutionality of the anti-abolition Butler Act. And it's a simple question. The issue was very much modernism or fundamentalism. It was nationwide. I mean, this was a big issue. There was no TV, but the newspapers reigned supreme. And it was page one. Now, there had been 7 times the Butler Act was passed. There were 17 states that were trying to consider some type of legislation on this question about evolution and anti-evolution. It ranged from a criminal, put somebody in jail, but the legislature thought, well, we don't want to do that. So we set a fine of $105 to $500, and that fine will basically come back to affect the case later on. The Tennessee legislature got there first. That's why George Rappelay saw it, ran down to Robinson's drugstore at the superintendent schools, head of the school board, a few other folks, and they said there, this is the economic rocket. It can bring Rhea County out of the hole. In regard to, and I'm going to throw in a little few tidbits I hadn't read much about. George Rappelay was, as we pronounce the R style, I understand, he was quite a hustler. Just like the hustler and druggist, Mr. Robinson. But Rappelay, the story about it, he just want to mention that in war, he got involved with 100 votes. He also got into a problem. They went to federal penitentiary for 366 days. And after, so I know everybody in this case was an angel there. Some of them had a little poke of wing. What I want to do is tell you about the perspective a little bit of Chattanooga and Dayton, how they affected each other. And Warren Adam, the first article I lifted, put it on the front page in his master's thesis. He had the privilege, when he wrote that in 1959, he interviewed 22 individuals of the era, and he also used 54 quotes in there, and the selections of those people, I'm going to verbally go through them. Like I say, I'm not going to try to go in a long spiel like the preacher who should everybody listen to for 30 minutes and start sleeping thereafter. Hopefully they'll get some questions. But Robinson Drugstore is where it all started. That's just since imagine all the publicity. This was a commercial and digital endeavor. The Progressive Club was kind of like the Chamber of Commerce. And they got everybody got on the bandstand, they might say. And the Robinson Drugstore, they had this first meeting. They up and decided what they were going to do. And of course, Mr. Robinson was this place became known with literature as he was known as the hustling druggist. We think these are good promoted. he actually sold the textbook that was in controversy, Hunter's Biology. And so he had a little financial interest. If you went to school books and you went to Rhea Central, you bought your biology book, which had about 5 pages on evolution and several hundred pages. That's where you bought your book. They've included some local lawyers. Judge Sue Hicks, who we all know, he immortalized by the song Johnny Cash, it was written about his mother, his brother. They were county attorneys, and the lawyers were a little skittish, but they liked all lawyers. They loved publicity. And so they got everybody involved. But the lawyer that first got volunteers, back in those days, he couldn't really volunteer, but John Neal did volunteer. And he up and came forward and expressed himself, I'm going to be your lawyer. And John Scopes, and the story goes, he was recruited. Scopes had been in Rhea Central for 1 year. He was a football coach. And his predecessor had left to go to Chattanooga City High School on 3rd Street, and still is there. And previous coach, his record was 2-8. But Scopes had been here 1 year, he won 4, lost 4, and tied 2. Well, he was going to be the next Vince Lombardi or so forth. And the thing about that is that the students, really, the football players loved it. Because that's what I mentioned, didn't say you had a very good football team before you got there. But anyway, they liked him, and also the lady students liked him. I want to make sure I'm not alleging any impropriety. John Scopes dated. The ladies liked him, and he liked the ladies. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Let's talk about Clarence Dell. I want to be Clarence Dell. Greatest trial lawyer of all time. You make $200,000 fees in 1912. I've heard lawyers say, well, can I be the next Clarence Dell? Well, that's fine. But I'm trying to remind you that Clarence Dell got charged with bribery in 3 different cases, including probably he could have been charged in the Scopes trial because those students that they put on, this 12-day trial had proof lasted about an hour. I think they put on a couple of students. They put on, he taught it, but whether he really did or not, this was a show trial. This was a 10 case designed to up and test this subject, but mainly was to up and raise County out of financial happiness. Let's talk about William Jennings Bryan. And this is where I had a theory that Tom Davis probably was responsible for shooting down, and I thought, I'm going to say something that's really the only I come up with. You think I'm anyway, I come up with these crazy ideas. But anyway, what happened is, William Jennings Bryan, of course, had run 3 times for president. 1896, 1900, and 2008. Well, he was 65 years old, and some people said, well, he's too old. And I thought, wait a minute, how old is Joe Biden and how old Donald Trump? But anyway, he was, in his younger days, he was very progressive. William Jennings Bryan was very progressive. You can imagine, he supported that women should have the right to vote. Did I get a laugh? Huh? But anyway, he had shifted to the right over time. He became a lecturer on Chicago's circuit, or whatever it is. And he made his living. He invested in real estate in Miami, Florida. Also lost his posterior in that, and they had a downward spiral. But anyway, I'll skip ahead. What was the biggest boost of the Scopes trial? The creation of William Jennings Bryan's University in 1930. It's now known as Bryan College. But that, like Chattanooga, we claim that we're going forward in the next Atlanta and the next Nashville, Las Vegas. And it was our boom was slowly going started with the aquarium down the river, Finley Stadium down in Moorfield. The anchors, Bryan College was the anchor that led to where Dayton is now, and so forth. And go without Bryan College, we don't know what would happen. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Chattanooga. I went to Old Central High School, which now is part of McCauley soccer field. But there are famous people from Chattanooga. Probably the most famous principal at City High School, Chattanooga City, was Creed Bates. Creed Bates was principal for many years. He also was at the Scopes trial. There's a picture of him and one of his students, who took the name of Sanderson, who did a photo book that's in the Smithsonian. And there's a picture of him in one of the many publications. Now, let me back up. Left out something that's typical. We got to go around in 99 years old. But anyway, I thought that in regard to why we believe Brian, the original thought was that I thought that, here he is at 65. He wants to run for president again. Well, politicians, they're like somebody that's either cocaine or heroin addiction, they don't get over it, they can't get over it. And that's what I thought to win, and I thought, that's the original idea. I'm going to say that, that's going to be, I'm going to impress everybody. It's very, something that's overseen our brain is still funny. Well, then I happened to come across an article on May the 26th of the Chattanooga News, and they talked about it in great detail. Well, is this going to be where Williams and Brian wants to come out of the bullpen as an old, like Grover Cleveland Alexander? He's old, he's done, but here's a chance and issue that will get him into the White House finally after 300. Well, that blew my theory. I've just copied what, if you get the May 26th Centennial News, I can tell you. Okay. Stacey Nelson. One thing that I realized why people in Rhea County a little bit not in younger everybody in Chattanooga because Chattanooga tried to steal the case. And even as recently before they started trial on July the 10th, John Neal tried to go to get a federal judge to transfer the case, and they're getting ready to pick the jury on Monday. Well, there's two stories here. One, he couldn't find the federal judge, he just happened to conveniently be out of unavailable. Or secondly, in regard that he found the judge, but the judge wouldn't sign any paper to join the state of Tennessee here in Rhea County Court. Well, that judge was named John Gould, G-O-R-P. And I think you know where I'm going here. He was the grandfather of Rhea County, father of the future in 1992, Vice President of the United States, Albert Gould. But that's another little story that I've mentioned too much. So what they intended to do is to try this case in the Memorial Auditorium. Warren Soldiers Memorial Auditorium. If air conditioned, it certainly wasn't. This place wasn't air conditioned, you know from the history. But when good folks in Rhea County found out what Chattanooga was trying to do, they kind of issued a little ultimatum. And they said, okay, people from Dayton go down to Chattanooga on either the train or the Model A and Model T. And they buy a lot of stuff in Chattanooga. Well, if you keep trying to get this trial away from us, then what we're going to do, we're going to tell people who can get on the train, just go on Knox, don't come to Chattanooga. Well, that all that kept the screen off. So anyway, that's Kelso Rice. Kelso Rice is depicted in some of the pictures as a security guy. He's wearing his Chattanooga uniform, maintaining the order in this place, on this field, hanging out the windows. I I mean, it was, you cannot imagine the crowds in Dayton at the time. And Kelso Rice was in charge of security. Well, when he got this order, he made a comment in regard to the fact that, and y'all behaved down here. This is not a circus, we're not a bunch of monkeys. Well, I think if that had been said before H.L. Mencken and Baltimore Sun really started making fun of Dayton, even though he privately thought we marked how courteous they were here when we came and visited. And he and Nellie Kenyon, this most famous women writers from the Chattanooga National Herald, who, by the way, there's a book about her. She's the lady that when Al Capone was being transferred from Chicago to the hotel down in Atlanta, called Atlanta Penitentiary. He was on the train in Chattanooga, and she got on the train somewhere and interviewed him. She was very effective, a great reporter. There's a book about her. I've written about her in Centennial.com. By the way, if you check out any of my lives that I made as executive of state, I've written a bunch of articles in Chattanooga.com and on the scopes, and since here months ago, I was hoping that maybe get a few more people here to the situation. And I thought we had 20, but we got more, so maybe my wife didn't take that after all. But anyway, Kelso Rice was also honored because when William Jennings Bryan died 5 days after the trial on July 21st, Mrs. Bryan asked him to escort William Jennings Bryan's body to Arlington Cemetery. You can't imagine the honors that went with his body traveling to Arlington. Every time the train stopped, they had a special train. Every time it stopped, people lined to pay respects. But the train didn't even have to stop in some places because people lined the railroad tracks and paid homage to him as his body went by. That's something for a guy, a three-time loser president, he only served 4 presidents. So that was another thing. Of course, the most famous visitor, unequivocal. Crowds swarmed around the individual. He was a star. He performed on Broadway, not Broadway, vaudeville. Oh my God, knows that from home. But anyway, he rode around in an open convertible. They would have his picture. People would pay to have his pictures taken with him. And he was making over $100,000 a year in 1925. And his name was Joe Minchin. Well, Joe Minchin did have to be a chimpanzee. But Joe was not the only monkey there. There was also a gorilla that had been brought in. There's a separate story. There's a gorilla in the cage. But anyway, the cab driver did pretty well. The Smith Brothers garage had 5 different cabs. And they were people right now. You got to remember, there's 200 reporters in this town. And the people who live in the hotels are filled up. People went into their house, they left, which they were some neighbors and so forth. And they owned expensive accounts and everything was, very generous. And there was those 5 cabs. The Smith brothers had 5 cabs. There's another gentleman in history by the name of Frank Stumpy Reed. And there's also 2 gentlemen in the bar by the name of what were known as barbers in a little barbershop across from the courthouse. That was Thurlow Reed, who was related to Stumpy, and Virgil Wiley. And what they did, they wanted to create some more publicity and atmosphere. Basically, what happened is they started a fake fight with George Appleton. Well, they decided who's it going to be? Well, what happened in regards, Raphael was starting it up, and he up and made a comment before I think it was the Progressive Club, and I'll quote, "There are more monkeys here in Dayton than in the Chattanooga Zoo." Well, that led to some fisticuffs, and of course, then Fergo got charged with assault, but he never got punished in any way. And he had a reputation in man-fighting barber, and that was his claim to fame. Now, the publicity just goes on and on and on. Just sitting there quietly. We can't imagine. But there's banners all around the town. The J.R. Darwin dry goods store over here, they even tried to tie that in to Darwin, the Spencer's been talking about it. In line, well, Darwin is in the sun. Darwin is here. Well, it wasn't the one that did talk about, but that used to have everything. The business were selling lemonade, the business were selling, well, there was also, they were taking, they said there's at least 2 trips a day to either allow the vendors to bring in illegal liquor in the bar. Of course, we were in the prohibition era. So, and there also, to be clear on the folks that they understand liquor here in the good mountains all the way from Jamestown down into anywhere about Alabama. A lot of us thought about my motto from the Mount Eagle. But anyway, there was banners across Market right there. And these reporters, civic clubs, they were eager to have somebody talk. And the guy that I'm only lawyer that ever took his coat off in this 90 weather was Douglas Field Malone. And he did it, and he was for the effect. I mean, on trial lawyer, I do some kind of attention. And he got up to argue, because they had all these experts that the defense was going to put on, this was not a constitutional violation. And Malone did that argument. He had his coat on, put out in this about the 5th or 6th day. So he very quietly gets us to try to argue with and people. But anyway, he puts up very carefully, very slowly, but has some effect, and folds his coat and puts it down, and then gives his argument. It's why these experts that come in all around the country talk on behalf of the defense, which they unfortunately not allowed. Judge Walston up and didn't allow that testimony. You've never heard before the jury. And the defense put on no proof. And it was very short, very to the point. But we'll talk about Judge Walston. By the way, Dudley Malone was a divorce lawyer. He came to Darryl, big buddies. And he was successful. Then he moved to California. And he died bankrupt. And but he was credited by William Dennis Bryan as the most effective lawyer on the defense side. And of course, maybe this is why he died bankrupt, because his wife was leading feminists advocating the voting rights for women of that era. Judge Ralston, who tried to decide on this case and basically was very pro-prosecution, Judge Ralston, he opened every day with prayer. That agnostic or atheist, whatever kind of there was, that kind of upset him a little bit, so he objected to that. And of course, that was another point of contention. But Judge Ralston did not ride this case to re-election. In 1926, for whatever reason, he up and lost it for re-election. His claim to fame in the trial is he almost put Clarence Darrow in contempt of court, put him in jail. Darrow made some comment about the way the judge was conducting the trial, and so this was on Friday, and he said, we'll come back on Tuesday, by the way, you make $5,000 bond, and we're going to have a hearing and see whether you should go to jail because you paid disrespect to the court. And of course, I told you about H.L. Mencken, the great descendant of all time, and I do wish to say, sometimes I try to imply things in my writing, but I am not the illegitimate grandson of H.L. Mencken, and I'm saying writing, I'll set the page tonight. But H.L. Mencken and Nellie, they got me buddies from the trial. There wasn't a whole lot to do, so H.L. asked Nellie, well, what do we do? She says, well, I understand we could go to the one movie theater. The movie's not very good. We could go and watch the Apes and Chimpanzee, of course, or we can go to the Holy Roller Church and watch Snake Hammer. Story in her autobiography suggests that when that is not complete. Now, trying to think, is there anything else I need to cover? Oh, yeah. John Scopes. Let's talk about little John. But, you know, he was a one-year football coach, and everybody liked him. And he had spoke. We didn't blind spoke at his commencement graduation in Illinois. And there is an issue in regard for Scopes in his Center of the Storm. He made him this was like hat. You know, Scopes looked at this and he had owl glasses. He wasn't a very attractive guy. He took it off and took his glasses off. And he wasn't bad looking. And the ladies liked him. Now, there wasn't just one lady that liked him, so forth. But I've got different proofs in regard to one lady in regard to my. Here it is. I want you to welcome a special guest here today. This gentleman right here. Yeah, he may have been in your eyes at some time. He's Dr. Harry Lawrence, an ophthalmologist from Chattanooga. He's also a lay Episcopal priest. And he's confided to me and his son Robbie. They both is with him. This Dr. Lawrence's mother was Mildred Taylor. Mildred Taylor was the lady who was shown on July 10th. Edition of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and she was purported to be Scopes' steady girlfriend. Well, that showed you how things got exaggerated. She was a student, and they did socialize some. Nothing improper about that. At that time, that's the students that sometimes went out with a professor in Dayton and had a whole lot to do. But anyway, she was featured this picture. There's another picture of 10 lovely ladies holding toy monkeys that were in there, and Mildred's in there, and I didn't know who it was, but Robbie identified that with his mother in that picture. And they honored me to come up here, and they also shared, Robbie wrote an article about his grandmother, and she was quite a lady. And he wrote that, and there's also one letter from John Scopes, who was a friend of Mildred Taylor. And they gave that to, we've given that to the libraries to go into the perpetual records and so on. Would you all welcome them if they came up to There's a couple of things in regard to, like I said, there were other pictures of Scopes with other ladies. One he was swimming, they didn't have swimming pools. He was at the Blue Hole, and he's smiling, and this after he'd been arrested but not trial, he said, basically what they said was, Scopes having a good time, not worried about the case. And so anyway, that was another picture. And there's another picture that in his book he talks about that he and Mildred Taylor were riding around, and the photographers pursued them and took their picture, and that's supposedly for international distribution. But the biggest mystery, if anybody's here to send can help me, because I've been trying to get a photograph, another one showing international, the Western Union, all the newspapers look nationally and internationally. And this was a picture that occurred at the Morgan Springs Hotel, which is on the east side of the Cumberland Plateau. There are actually two of them, and they both burned down. And one of them was owned by the Gardenhire family, which you all may recognize as the state senator, Todd Gardenhire. They owned that one. But in any way, another famous family from Chattanooga, family from Chattanooga, that was big in this area, was the Waterhouse. But where this courtroom sits, I believe, is part part of what was known originally as the Garden Hour Addition, and I believe there's memorial signs that signs around here. And by the way, there's a tour of places, historical buildings that still exist, and I saw the flyer a while ago, and I should recommend that to you, to give you more history other than this in the Valley of Oak Water. But anyway, Morgan Springs Hotel, during this trial, were having dances every night. And that was where there were reporters up there. And Scopes goes up there one evening, and here's a hotel at the side of the east side of the mountain. The hotel is over here, and in between there's a dark space. Well, he's approached by one of his former students, unidentified, and she says, you know, I'm kind of scared to walk back to the hotel. Would you mind escorting me through the dark space? And Scopes, being the gentleman that he was, of course, replies to her. And so walking through the dark area, although by whatever reason, divine providence or some other reason, she reaches up and plants a big kiss on him. And by coincidence, also at that moment, flashbulbs go off. And that eventually appeared nationwide the next day or the day after. Now, I tried every way to get that picture, and that's fact or fiction. But if anybody here had any way to get it, I would love to get that. But I think that's just a fascinating subject. Now, Scopes really wasn't supposed to be here on this trial. The school year is over, but there was a beautiful blonde that he liked, that wanted to, she didn't have much to do with him. One day he ran into her and she said, he said, I never see you at the dance. And she said, well, my family doesn't believe in that. And they talked, but anyway, she invited him to come to the church box supper. You know, churches used to have on Sunday, the ladies would cook up the box of chicken or ham and so forth, and then the young men would bid. And with the bid, if you won the bid, you got to have the privilege to eat your box lunch and talk to the young lady. Well, that was one of the two reasons he allegedly stayed in town in the guard, because he got that invite, and that's how they got him. He was playing tennis, I think, ago, so they recruited him to be the guinea pig in this historical case. But anyway, that was a beautiful blonde, and I want to kind of close with a more serious note I wondered about. But Scopes, he wrote this book in 1967, and he was nearly 70 years old. He died shortly thereafter, and this was his memoirs. And basically, what he said, I think, sums it up. I don't know what kind of celebration Rick and Tom will have at the 200th anniversary. I'd like to attend on the stage to make them mine. But anyway, here's what Scopes said from the back of his book. Quote, the basic freedom to speech, religion, academic freedoms to teach, and to think for oneself, defended at Dayton, are not so distantly removed. Each generation, each person must defend these freedoms or risk losing them forever. It's kind of prophetic in light of what's going on in the world today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here and part of this historical event for 100 years. I'm honored you asked me. I would say one thing. If you want something more probably historically correct or academically correct, the Centennial Bar Association is going to have a seminar in September with one of our judges who unfortunately had to stay used to work for me, and the county historian and city historian for Centennial. And the line, raise your hand, and Kirk Walker, whose father happened to be the mayor of Centennial. But thank you very much. I will echo some time anyway, but thank you for having me. Very
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Summers? We've got a gentleman over there here.
yes, sir.
Hi. Obviously, the scope of conviction was overturned on this technicality with Judge Ralston imposing the fine from the bench. Do you think he made a mistake, or was that a deliberate ploy to derail the ACLU?
No, he didn't. I happen to have a similar experience. You no longer have a city court in Chattanooga handling criminal cases because we had a judge in there who was fining people $1,000. The Tennessee Constitution says you can only fine people $50. A judge, if any fine above $50 has to be set by the jury. The jury merely found him guilty. Actually, what happened is that Clarence Darrow, like some sneaky trial lawyers, up and convinced the state, let's don't argue the case. And I left out one point that's pretty significant. There's William Jennings Bryan, which may support my other theory that he won't run for president. He prepared a 15,000-word closing argument that you can buy it downstairs. Yeah, I've got a copy of it. I think Bryan gave it out at one of their celebrations. But Clarence Darrow said, "Oh, y'all just find him guilty. We don't need to argue this case." Well, Jennings Bryan, he was not happy with it. William Jennings Bryan, he goes to the Chattanooga Times News, and the editor, I left a couple things out. George Minton was the publisher, and they published this thing. They typed up all 15,000 words of it in regard to, and why William Jennings Bryan would want that to go further into history, I think circumstantially supports my contention is he was wanting to run for president again. That addiction of politics had not gone away. But the Tennessee Constitution is what rules that you fine over $50. And they've tried to change it for years, but it still had. And by the way, I think you all know that when that was reversed on technicality, the Tennessee Supreme Court, when they went up to argue, if I were your case, whatever court I'm in, if I get 30 minutes, I'm lucky. They had 2 days of argument before in the Tennessee Supreme Court. Every lawyer wanted to jump on the bandwagon when it came up on appeal, but they argued all these wonderful constitutional issues, but the court didn't listen to any of them. The court sent it back on that technicality you mentioned and said, we think that, we're sending this back because the jury did not set the fine, and we also, with a little instruction, they up and said, this bizarre case is being sent back, and we hope that the state will just basically dismiss it. Well, this was 1927. They did dismiss it. In 1967, the legislature did not want to get into this cauldron of religion versus science, and so therefore they up and waited. People tried to bring it up. Oh no, let's put that in. I think there used to be a committee called the Black Hole in regard to if it goes to the black hole, it never comes out. But finally, in 1967, there was a case out of Arkansas, Anderson versus Arkansas, that raised the question, and it got to the United States Supreme Court. And basically, the legislature showed a wonderful display of courage. They then dismissed, rescinded the Butler Act in 1990. This wonderful historical experience in 1925. Yes?
Question. As an attorney, do you think that Ralston was justified in denying Darrow's wish to bring expert witnesses on evolution to the trial? Was he, he's been criticizing that in the latter years, but was Ralston right in saying, well, that may be that evolution is not what's on trial, just the question of the court is, did Scopes violate the Tennessee statute or did he not? And therefore irrelevant. So was he right or wrong, you think, from the perspective?
Well, of him, then he reversed his position on this situation. I'm not a judge, but if I, whether that should have gone in, the argument, and Tom, by the way, Tom Stewart, who became United States Senator, and when we were in his mind the weekend he died, Tom Stewart wanted to go help him campaign in 1926 in the Valley in Winchester. That's when he came back to the night Chattanooga, came back to Dayton, and had a nice lunch and gave us a sermon or speech to the church and went to sleep and then woke up. But, the question, ask your question again.
So the question, Ralston has been criticized in latter years.
Yeah.
Not expert witnesses that they're allowed to testify. Essentially being allowed, the question before the court is, did Scopes violate the Tennessee statute or did he not whether evolutions were, that's not the question for the court. Therefore, their testimonies are relevant to the case. Do you agree that was Ralston justified in his ruling, or was he not in his attorney?
Well, the real problem is that John Neal screwed up. He didn't get the transcript. See, he didn't get the transcript typed up within statutory time. So he did not preserve. He did not preserve the record, so it should have been decided by the appellate court. But in regard to the state's argument, very forcibly by Tom Stewart, was the fact the only question here is, did he teach it? And because you have not timely preserved your record, we're not going to anything other than did you teach it? And that narrative thing, I think if the record had been filed timely, then it go over all these other issues, and then it probably could have made it to the U.S. Supreme Court, that whether that time they would take a state case or say, well, but they really want to get the federal court to get the United States Supreme Court. But so I can't answer your question specifically to say it would make a difference. But also the fact that the embarrassment of, first of all, William J. Bryan never taken a stand. He volunteered, and you couldn't call. They couldn't call him. Volunteer to go up on witness the state closed. This was not following the most standard rules of jurisprudence as we know it in today's world. Yes, sir.
You started to say something about Darrow and calling those students up to testify. You were talking about bribery, so I didn't know if you were suggesting that the students got paid.
I'm sorry.
You didn't mean that you're not trying to bribe the students.
Oh no, I did not. These bribery came out of the McLemore brothers, the bombing of the Los Angeles Times newspaper.
What he's talking about there is when Darrow realized that there was a great question whether or not Scopes taught evolution. And for you, Jerry, just to add to your one of the two students that testified, Harold Bud Shelton, I got to interview just before he passed away, and I can tell anybody that he went to his grave swearing the only thing they discussed that week, Scopes, was in the classroom was football blood. Yeah. But when Darrow realized this, he got the two boys and John Scopes together. They sat over in front of the Morgan home, and Darrow had Scopes go over the lesson so that when the two boys testified, they were saying under oath, Mr. Scopes said this and Mr. Scopes said that. And one other thing. And another thing, yes, Raffle K married Olga, commonly known as Precious Corbett. She was a nurse and she treated him for a snake bite.
There was a gentleman.
I was just going to ask a simple question. Was that where the jury was at the time, and is that still where the jury was when this courthouse stopped being used?
No,
Jury sat right in the center.
No, the jury sat here in the 2 hours or so that they were in the courtroom. But when juries, since then, would all sit here. I don't know why they put that over there. I think an architect designed this, not a lawyer.
One of the things to realize, the Tennessee Supreme Court got this case. At that time, Supreme Court justices were elected, and they were all up for re-election. And the law was popular. So, as Jerry said, they turned it on that technicality, but they had a note up there in the corner. We don't want to see it again. And to answer your question, from all my studies, I actually believe that the judge and Stewart were in collusion, and the judge knew what he was doing when he imposed that fine. They were setting it up because Stewart was getting beat up from the state levels. Like, get this thing wrapped up. We're tired of seeing it on the front page of every newspaper in the English-speaking world.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to break it up, but I think there might be somebody that might be hungry. We will break now, come back at 1 o'clock for Dr. Larson. Again, restaurant down the street here, 3 a block down, Market Street and to the left. And we will see you at 1 o'clock.